Okay, so in this one, we're going to start working on getting this to work also in a continuous motion sort of way. So far, our projectile motion time only marches forward when we push the button, right? Each time we push the button, another second goes by. It's a little bit more fluid. It looks a little bit more natural if we can have the computer do all that for us, so it just continues the motion without us having to push buttons. And so we're going to do a lot of the setup work for that in this video. Now, we're not going to be learning anything new on the physics side. So if it's just the physics that you're wanting to learn, you've got it all down. The rest of this is all on the programming end. How it's a critical thinking challenge of how would we switch this over to have the computer do it, on the fly. So the first thing we should do is we should save this script that we've done as a new script, just so that we've got this one working. We like how it's working. Let's not mess with it anymore. Let's leave that one as is, and let's do a continuous script. So continuous projectile. Okay, so now we've added a new one here into our projects, and so if we ever want to jump back to just the manual version, we have that option. So let's think about how we're going to get the computer to kind of do this calculation for us. Remember how a computer works. The screen updates its display so many times a second, 30 times a second, 60 times a second, something like that. So the first thing we need to do with our continuous motion is jump down to this set our frame rate to 30 frames per second line, and we're going to add, we're going to tab in to make sure we're inside that main loop. We're going to add tick, open parentheses, 30, close parentheses. Okay. Now, I can tell you already, just because I've worked through this, we're going to use the frames per second a lot of times, a lot of different times. And so again, we're going to do that thing where we're going to soft code this, because later on, maybe a year from now, maybe 10 years from now, someone picks up this application and says, well, this is cool, but I'd really like it to run at 60 frames per second. That would make it look smoother. Rather than make them go through and change all of those individual number 30s and hope that they're not changing, because like a find all, replace all thing won't really work that well, because maybe the number 30 was used for something else. And so that's no good. So we're going to come up here to our variables, and we're going to define sim FPS equals 30.0. We're using the points. That's important. You can't just put 30 in here. The 30.0 makes that a float value. So when we do some math later, rather than round to the nearest integer when it does the math, it's going to use all the decimal places that it wants to keep track of these things. A lot more accurate if we put that 0.0 at the end of that. So we need that. And then we're going to come down here, and rather than say run it at 30 frames per second, we're going to run it at whatever we have set that sim FPS to be. In this case, it'll be 30, but now if we ever want to change it, we can change that all at once. We're going to need something else too. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want this this main loop down here to do something every time it runs through. And now, rather than run as fast as it possibly can, which is what we've been doing in the manual motion because it didn't matter, now it's only going to run 30 frames per second. So first, let's have a way to set manual motion on and off. So let's come up here to our Boolean variables, and we will type in manual motion equals true. Let's just leave that for true for right now. And we want, when we press the H key, we want our computer to check to see if we're in manual mode or not. So we're going to come to this if event key equals the H key, and manual motion is equal to true, 2 exclamation points there. And same thing with the V key. We're going to make sure that it's checking to see that it's in manual mode, because if it is, we want it to do that thing that we've already set up. Same thing with the C key. Okay, and the rest of it's pretty good, because the reset, we wanted to do this regardless, right? If we're in continuous or manual, we press the R button to reset things. Great. We want it to do that either way. And same thing with the escape key. We don't care if it's in manual or continuous. If we press the escape key, we want it to quit, so we don't have to worry about those. So now, how are we going to do continuous motion? How are we going to set it up so that when we press the H key and manual motion is false, actually, I'll leave that to you. You should set up something in here for that, right? Set it up to have an event that checks elif the event key if someone presses H and manual motion is off. Set that up. Set the same thing up for the V key. Set the same thing up for the C key. See if you can do that on your own. Right now, this should be old hat to you. We're going to come down here. We're going to type elif event key equals pygame. You could also have just copied this, right? Underscore H and manual motion is equal to false. All right. And let's just, for now, what can we do in here? If we just leave it like this, it's going to give us an error. I don't want to have to worry about how we're actually going to code it right now. So I just want to put something in here for the time being, just some kind of placeholder that's not going to really matter. So why don't we, I don't know. If manual motion is false, why don't we just go ahead and set the manual motion to false again? So, right, so we're not actually changing anything there. Oops. But we've got like some code in there so it doesn't give us an error. We're going to do the same thing down here, and actually, why don't we just go ahead and copy this line. And we're going to change the true to false here. And again, we're just putting in some kind of placeholder stuff for the time being. Okay. And once more, just putting in a placeholder. So now now we're checking. When we press those keys, it's going to do one thing if we're in manual mode. It's going to do another thing if we're in continuous mode, or if manual mode is off. So we've done, I think, a lot of the setup work. Why don't we go ahead and think about what we want to happen while continuous motion is on. So if manual motion is false, what do we want to have happen? Okay, sorry, I had to stop and give that some thought. You'll have to bear with me. It's been a while since I've actually programmed the continuous motion on the one that I made, so we're kind of figuring this out together. We're actually going to need to find a couple more things before we get into what happens if manual motion is false. So let's come down here to the little dummy code that we put in. Let's think about what, if it's continuous motion, what do we need to set when we press the H key for it to work? Well, it turns out that it's going to do all the thinking up here, right? All the computing up in the if it's false area. So all we really need to do down here when we press the H keys, we need to set the values that we want. We're going to go ahead and set the ball.xpos equal to 100. We're going to set the ball.ypos equal to 100. This is us getting around. With continuous motion, we don't really need the reset button. We can keep it there because it doesn't hurt anything, but we don't really need it because when you press the H key, you don't want it to start horizontal motion wherever you happen to be. You want it to start horizontal motion from the start, and so we can reset the position of the ball to start with. Then what do we want? Well, we want the xval of the ball equal to 50. We want the yval of the ball equal to 0. We do need to set that there too, because if we press the V key for vertical motion, the ball might get some y velocity, and if we don't reset it to 0 when we press the H key, it's just going to keep whatever it had, and so we do need to reset that. And likewise, we need to reset the y acceleration to 0, because again, if we pressed the V key before this, then we would have set it to 10. We need to reset that. Okay. We'll want to change the clock back, right? We'll want to change the clock value to 0. Because we do want to start time over when we start horizontal motion, and we will then go ahead and update the clock as well. So change label clock info, and then we'll want the string that is the clock value. Close both those parentheses. Okay, so that's good for, and why don't we just go ahead and copy this? Because we're going to want similar things for when we press the V key and manual motion is false. We're just going to want to change those values. So now we want the horizontal velocity to be 0 when we just are considering vertical motion, and we want that y acceleration to be 10. Likewise, we're going to come down to the combined motion button, and we want the horizontal velocity now, and we want that y acceleration as well. Okay. So now the only problem here is, you can imagine what was nice about the manual motion for each key is that when you pressed the key, that's when you made the indicator. So you could tell it when you pressed it what color to turn that indicator. Every time we pressed the C key, it made an indicator that was the yellow color, and every time. But we don't have that luxury anymore. Now the computer is going to need to know if we are in, or what type of motion we have, right? Are we currently running horizontal, in which case do we need to press, or to make red dots, or are we in vertical and make green dots? So we're going to add in up at the top here a value, and we're going to call it indicator color. Right? And now we can't just type in colors here. I guess we could make this a string, but rather than do that, I'm going to set this to a number, and so when we press the H key, we'll change this to 1, so that'll tell the computer, okay, we're in horizontal. When we press the V key, we'll change it to 2, that'll tell the computer we're in vertical, and when we press the C key, we'll change it to 3, that'll tell it we're in combined motion. And this will also serve as a good sort of multi-way toggle for us when we want to tell the computer to either start or stop continuous motion, because we don't want it to be doing certain things all the time. We only want it to do certain things after we've pressed a key. And so if this thing is 0, a key hasn't been pressed yet, and if it's not 0, then someone's pressed some kind of key, and so that's when we'll start doing other things. I think this video has gotten long enough as it is. We'll stop here. On this one, we'll actually go ahead and add the indicator colors and get the continuous motion working in the next video. I'll see you there.